Hello, fellow Star Trek fans. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Clonestar Podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Mike Overton, and joining me in the co-host seat this week is my wonderful friend, the lovely Jodie Pickens. Jodie, how are you doing this week?
Doing great. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me this week. And we've got a really cool guest. We are joined by a writer who's written an episode of DS9, as well as 14 episodes as Voyager, as well as acting as the executive story writer for the entire fourth season of Voyager. She's also the writer of the Star Trek Experience, The Borg Invasion 4D, as well as having worked on Earth Final Conflict and Roswell. We are delighted to be joined by the lovely Lisa Klink. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us this week.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Lisa, let's kind of take things right back to the beginning. Did you grow up in a creative household?
Not especially. My dad was a mortgage banker, and my mother was a homemaker.
Okay.
So, I mean, they didn't have creative jobs, but I started reading like crazy from an early age. I mean, I was kind of in fantasy land, yeah, even if my parents weren't.
Were
Well,
you into,
although
yeah, right? Were you into like fantasy or sci-fi at a
Well,
young
Star
age?
Wars came out when I was like 7 years old, and
Yeah,
that pretty
me
much set
too.
me on the sci-fi path. And ever since then, I have been a sci-fi fan. Yes,
Haven't looked back. Yeah, that's
yes,
good.
absolutely not.
let's face it, sci-fi is the best genre.
It is.
Well, no one ever dies because somehow or another they always manage to find a way to come back.
It's true. Nobody ever stays dead in
No,
sci-fi.
No,
it's great.
no.
Only the real world was like that.
Right.
So, were you a Star Trek fan?
Not until Next Generation.
Okay.
The original series was on a little before my time, and I didn't really get into it until, like I said, Next Generation, which was on when I was in college. And I remember my entire dorm would get together and watch Next Generation,
Yeah.
and it was a kind of a group experience and just so much fun.
I relate to that. You and I are the same age practically. And so college was all about like our downtime was totally next gen, which was
Yeah,
it's fun. It was a fun experience to have that with, your
Yes.
peers.
There's me
absolutely.
as a kind of a 4-year-old watching the next generation. A little bit younger.
Little, he's the baby. It's okay.
Okay.
So, obviously, with that in mind, what did you study?
I studied English
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
in college, and I knew that I wanted to write, but I wasn't sure what. I didn't know if I wanted to be a journalist or a screenwriter or a novelist or a playwright. I didn't really know until I took a film studies class my junior year in college, and they had a producer come out from Hollywood and talk about his job. And that was the first time I'd ever met anybody who actually was in the entertainment business and did this for a living. And so it was the first time it occurred to me that I could do this for a living. Wait a
Hmm.
minute.
Yeah.
And
Light
at
bulb
that
moment.
point, I was pretty committed that I wanted to come out to Los Angeles and write screenplays.
So,
And
what
actually, I
is.
wanted to direct.
Oh,
I wanted
okay.
to
Oh,
direct
nice.
screenplays. Yes.
Oh,
But
How
then
did
I
that
came
go
out
over with
here.
your parents?
Well, they were actually supportive, I must
Oh,
say.
good. Good.
Yes, even though I took my nice 4 year education and was like, I'm gonna go to Hollywood.
it's kind of most parents' worst nightmare, really, isn't it? When they say, like, I'm going to go and be a singer or
Probably,
something. It's like,
but no, they're
uh,
they're very supportive.
oh, that's good. So, what is it
That's
about
good.
writing that appealed to you?
Well, I've always liked telling stories.
Okay.
Even when I was little, when I was growing up, I liked my friends and I would get together and write plays. And I always liked writing short stories and just basically making stuff up. And
Yeah.
I was always such a fan, of not only sci-fi, but just, fiction in general. And that like I said, I used to read like crazy. And to be involved in the other side of that, to tell the stories,
Yeah.
was always really appealing to me.
So, what kind of things were you reading at that kind of age?
Let's see. Well, in school, I was reading a lot of kind of the classics. The ones that really stuck with me were like the Jane Austen books.
Yep.
Um, I remember, and Tree Grows in Brooklyn was one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love that book. And that was really kind of what got me started. I mean, I would read everything, mostly fiction. I've gotten more into nonfiction the older I've gotten,
Yeah.
but really I started off with fiction.
Did you find then when you made that decision to like, oh, Hollywood, that's where I want to be. I want to do this. Did you then kind of find yourself paying more attention to who was writing?
Yes.
Like your favorite shows.
Yes.
Where did you find maybe your influence in that genre?
Well, like I said, I was really wanted to direct features,
Mhm.
was my goal when I came out here, and I wanted to be
Okay.
the next James Cameron. He
Nice.
was my
Well,
big inspiration.
yeah, yeah,
The Terminator 2 just came out like when I first moved to LA, and I was like, I want to do that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's like the best toy you could have, right? Like being able
Absolutely.
to make a film like that.
Yeah,
I
Yes.
get
absolutely.
that.
And then I actually got lucky. I ended up working for Catherine Bigelow.
Oh,
I was her
Oh,
development
really?
assistant, and so I was reading scripts for her.
Oh,
And
wow.
first of all, reading all those scripts was just a huge education in screenwriting.
Yeah.
And watching her direct, I realized I do not want to direct.
very quickly decided no.
Yes, that was pretty well what decided me. That I just because directing is about interpreting somebody else's script, and I
Yeah.
wanted to be in earlier on the process. I wanted to be the one coming up with the story
When
rather
to create
than
it, yeah.
yes, exactly, create it.
Got you.
Did you?
Okay.
I find it interesting because you said that like reading all those scripts really like is an education in and of itself. And I studied music in college,
Hmm.
and we're all about studying scores and
Yeah.
that process and learning that way. So I find that's an interesting parallel that
Hmm.
to be made because I do think like screenwriting, whether it's for TV or film, like it's a unique genre. That's not one we see or have access to um, regularly, especially like probably back when we were in college.
Yes, very true. There were no screenwriting classes when I went to
Right,
college.
right. Or no program. Like, I mean, there are
Right.
like entire degrees dedicated to that now.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I think you could say that about most sort of creative industries.
Mm,
Now there's pretty much a program for everything. But
yeah.
Hmm.
even go back 10, 12 years, that never existed, really. You had to kind of really hunt them down. Whereas now, I'm not going to say dime a dozen because they're not, but they
Well,
are
they're
a lot
more
more
accessible.
accessible, yeah, than
Yes.
they
Yeah.
were 10, 12, even, and so on and so forth. So,
Hmm.
what would you, so kind of keeping on the writing front, what would you say that your writing style is?
I'd like to say that it's conversational.
Yep.
I've been told by several people that I write like I talk, and that it sounds like me.
Is that a bad thing?
Which
That's not a bad thing.
No,
It's
I
I
wouldn't
don't
say
think
it's
that's
a
a
bad
bad thing at all. I don't think it's
no,
bad.
that's your voice. That's okay.
It is. And some of the writers I like are like Stephen King, who I think is also just a very conversational
Yeah.
Yeah,
writer. And I think that's the style that I aspire to.
yeah.
Okay. So fast forward a few years, how did Voyager come about?
Well, a little bit before Voyager, I actually went to a Star Trek convention and I went to a writers panel, in which it was Brandon Braga and Ron Moore and a couple other writers that I don't remember at the moment. Sorry. But
We
basically,
won't
they
quiz you. It's
said,
fine.
That's fine.
thank you. And they said that Star Trek would accept unsolicited specs, which meant that
Oh,
they
all
would
right.
accept scripts that
Okay.
did not come through an agent. And all you
Mhm.
had to do was write one and send it in, and they would read it. And I thought, well, I love Next Generation. I could write one of those. So I did. I
Nice.
wrote a spec Next Generation and I sent it in. And Deep Space Nine was on the air at the time.
Hmm.
Yep.
Next Generation was just finishing up. And they actually liked my script and they invited me in to pitch for Deep Space Nine. So I did. I went in and I pitched DS9. And I ended up pitching there, I think, 4 times before I ended up selling a story, which became Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
It was a great episode.
It's
Oh, thank
such a
you.
great episode.
I had
Do
a
you
really good
mind?
time writing it.
Yeah. What did you like most about that process?
Well, what I liked most about that episode is that it took two of our heroes and put them at odds with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And neither of them was exactly right or exactly wrong.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of perspective. And that's something you don't actually get to do very much in Star Trek because in the future,
Yeah.
people have found a way to work out their conflicts. And so they don't tend to be, at odds very often. And so
Yeah.
it was really fun to be able to put them against each other.
I'm just trying to
That's
think.
amazing to me because I think that gray area that you're talking about, we don't see it often, and I think it's what makes like that episode in particular special and stand out. But I think it's nice when we are able to see that from our main characters or the heroes of the story. Puts us back in reality a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
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 So I'm just trying to think. I think it was Renee that directed that episode, if I remember correctly.
Renee Barjanois? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Nice.
Yeah. So obviously, as a hang on, I've lost my train of thought there.
Well,
As a
that's the way that
teleplay-
the
there we go.
Voyager.
As a teleplay writer, how involved do you get once that's done? Is that it done, dusted, and over, and then you move on to the next project, or do you get?
Well,
Are you
certainly
still there to make
as
amendments?
a freelance
or-
script writer,
Right.
which I was on Deep Space Nine, you're done. I turned in, I think, 2
Oh,
drafts of
okay.
the screenplay, and then Ron Moore actually did the rewrite on it, which I was very happy with. I thought he did a
Yeah.
great job. When I was on Voyager, we got a little more involved. Like I would go to the production meetings, I could go down to the set and, meet the directors and stuff like that. But I wasn't involved in a day-to-day sort of way. I wasn't on set all day, the way that some writers are on other shows. And I wasn't involved in editing or post-production at all. So pretty much once you were done with the script, your job was pretty finished.
Right. So you say you got to go down to the sets. Did you get to explore Voyager set?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I explored the Voyager set very thoroughly.
Something I'm very. I have this argument quite a lot because a lot of people, especially Star Trek fans, are like, "Oh, the Enterprise D has the prettiest bridge of them all," and I was like, I don't know, something about Voyager's bridge. Still one of my favorite bridges. So
Yes.
I would have loved to have been able to see that set.
Yeah, it was great.
Maybe one day.
So how did you go from DS9 and doing that kind of freelance script to get to be on Voyager's writing team?
Well, Ira Stephen Bear, who was the executive producer of Deep Space Nine, knew that Voyager was just getting started. And he knew that Jerry Taylor, the executive producer of Voyager, was looking to hire staff writers. And so he passed along my script to her. And I guess she liked it well enough because they hired me on as a staff writer.
Nice.
For the second season of Voyager.
Yeah.
I mean, and
so you got... Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was just going through some of the episodes that you're down as staff writer on for season 2. There's Prototype, Alliances, Threshold, Meld, Dreadnought, Life Signs. So in my eyes, some of the 2 Vics we can kind of glaze over.
No, that's a great episode.
Hang on,
it is actually.
It is fantastic. We're just going to glaze over it for a second because I was just going to say some of the, I think, most popular and some of the best episodes from season 2 were you down as a staff writer. So how is that process? Is that a case of that it's literally a group of staff writers in a room hashing ideas out, and then somebody then refines that idea down?
Well, what happens is, our entire staff gets together. I mean, staff writer is basically the lowest level of among the writing staff. Then you move up to story editor, and then to executive story editor, and then co-producer, and basically those are all just sort of ranks of writer.
Right.
And so we would all get together in a room and take a story idea, like a paragraph, idea, and break it down into scenes.
Right.
And create an outline that way. And so then the writer of that episode would take that outline and go off and write the first draft, and then come back and get notes from everybody to go off and write the second draft. And so there was sort of the lead writer on that episode, but it was very much a collaborative process in coming up with the story and the scenes and us often doing rewrites. The senior writers would rewrite the junior writers,
Yeah.
and we would all rewrite freelance writers.
Right. Okay. Got you. Because then, am I right in thinking midway through season 3, you then kind of bumped up a level to story editor?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So then that takes you out sort of, that's the next ladder up, isn't it? From
It's the next
staff
rank
writer.
up. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Were there a lot of women in that writer's room your first season?
There were not. It was basically me and Jerry Taylor and the
I
boys.
wondered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did that change
Was-
as the show moved on?
No, I was,
No.
I mean, I was there for 3 seasons and it was always just me and Jerry Taylor.
Some strong willpower there, I think, on behalf of you and Jerry Taylor.
Well, Jerry, certainly. I mean, she was the voice of Janeway, and what she
Yeah.
said went.
Yeah. Did you enjoy learning from that experience with her?
Very much so. Very much
Yeah.
so. I mean, Voyager is still the best gig I've ever had. And
Oh,
Jerry
wow.
was a
Yeah.
wonderful mentor. She really showed me like how to run a show and how to
Yeah.
run a room. And she was terrific. I loved working with her.
Yeah. I mean, she's, at least for me, and I think a lot of Trek fans, like, now that we have access to like learning more about the people behind the scenes, through media, in the internet, the glorious internet, and I think it's been empowering to learn how influential she was, kind of across the board.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think you don't find really anyone that has anything bad to say
No,
about
you really
working
don't.
with her. And I think
really
for
don't.
that era of time, that mid late 90s, like, that's a big deal that there
Mhm.
wasn't just Jerry who was in an executive, producing role, but like you as a female staff writer, that's a big deal for
Yeah.
the 90s. And
Oh yeah, no,
Uh,
most of the shows that I was on after that, I was the only woman in the room. And so to have 2 women in the room, I know, wow.
right, that's crazy.
It is.
Do you think that experience kind of set you up for success moving forward, like being able to handle, being that sole woman in the room, so to speak?
Yeah, you just kind of had to get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very lucky in that I never encountered like a lot of sexism or harassment or anything like that. I was very lucky.
That's great, and I'd
Yes.
love to hear that. And I think especially like with Voyager too, because it was such I mean, that was a very women-centric,
Yeah.
show, and
Yes.
that was new, not just for TV, but I think a little bit for sci-fi too,
Yeah.
to see women in these leadership roles. So, how was it writing for like female actors and characters in a room where you're one of 2 women
Mhm.
with that
Well, like I
perspective?
said, Jerry was really Janeway.
Yeah.
And so whatever she indicated about Janeway, whatever, decisions that Janeway would make, really came straight from Jerry. And so that was kind of fun to write. You always felt like you were kind of collaborating with her on that. Um, I don't really remember feeling differently about writing the female characters.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, the difference was more writing the human characters versus the alien characters.
Oh, yeah.
And, the characters that had a really strong point of view, like Tuvok or B'Elanna, or Seven, certainly,
Right.
as opposed to some of the humans, like Harry or Chakotay, who didn't have quite as distinct a point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think what you mentioned, B'Elanna and Seven, like, they had some very serious character arcs and
Yes, they
development
did.
as characters throughout the series, and I think it's I think it's a testament to the writing and the actors, that made that happen. But I think it's also what again sets that apart, because they weren't just secondary characters
No.
by any means. And I'm curious about, like, with like B'Elanna, she really faced that duality of her human side versus Klingon, and then you had Seven battling the Borg to human.
Hmm.
So you found that perspective more interesting to deal with or easier to deal with than writing for just
Uh,
like the straight human characters?
Not easier, but more interesting. Yeah, I mean,
Oh, sure.
they had, like you said, basic conflicts that they were trying to resolve, and that's always really interesting to have a character who's kind of at war with themselves.
Yeah.
And like Seven had a really interesting transition because she didn't want to be human.
No.
Right.
Most of the characters we've seen, like Data, or Odo,
Oh,
were not
yeah.
human. They wanted to be human. And, B'Elanna wanted to be human, and
Hmm.
Seven really did not. And that was kind of unique.
Yeah.
One hell
I
of a
think it's
juxtaposition, isn't
Yes, it
yes,
is.
yes. It really is. I love that though. I love that it's a more interesting perspective from a writer
Hmm.
standpoint. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, do you or did you have like a favorite character to write for?
Well, like I said, the alien characters were generally more interesting than the human characters. I liked writing for Tuvok. Writing Vulcans is fun, I think.
Yeah.
And and yes, I really liked writing for B'Elanna,
That's no,
because she was such a passionate character,
yeah,
that
Right.
she was fun to write for. And the Doctor is always fun to write for.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
Yeah.
Mostly because whatever you gave him, Robert Picardo would just knock it out of the park.
yeah.
Uh, that he would just enhance any dialogue that you gave him.
I think what's amazing about the Doctor is he literally started off as a light bulb,
Yes.
and
Yes.
looking how he is in season 1, and then looking at how he is in
Oh
season
yeah.
7, and that whole arc, and
Hmm.
there are those whole storylines about the rights of a hologram, and
Yeah.
which are massive things back in, rights in general were a massive thing back in the 90s, and they still are today.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But and you look at those, I think that is a testament, one, yes, to Robert Picardo's acting, but
Yes.
also down to the craft of the writers.
Yes. Because like you said, he's one of those who, as a character, starts off as a light bulb, right?
Yep.
But he doesn't realize he wants to be human or wants to understand aspects of humanity.
Yeah,
It kind of meets him as a surprise, I feel, throughout the series
Yes.
until he gets to later in the series, and then he's kind of embracing that freedom of being able to interact and go and do that. And I think that's an interesting. I mean, we could talk about the Doctor. That's a whole other conversation for a whole other podcast, right? But
Well, the Doctor comes to see himself as an expert on humans. I mean,
yeah,
he takes it upon
yeah,
himself to teach Seven how to
Devon,
be
yeah,
human.
exactly.
And so he has that huge arc. Yeah.
Yeah. So this year, as I said earlier, it's 30 years of Voyager, which is an insane thing to be saying.
Yeah.
Obviously, as
it
Star
is,
Trek,
Mike.
I know, I know. Obviously, as Star Trek has continued, obviously a lot of Voyager characters have returned. How do you
Yeah.
feel about the longevity of the characters? Seven of Nine and Picard,
Hmm.
Harry Kim in Lower Decks and Star Trek Online. So, how do you
Yeah.
feel
Janeway
about
and Prodigy.
exactly?
Right.
Yeah. I think it's terrific. And I think that those characters are obviously distinctive enough that they carry over, that they stay in people's minds and that they want to bring them back for another look.
Yeah.
How does
Now I
that
have
feel for you as someone who was instrumental in telling their stories?
Oh,
That
it's very
these characters,
satisfying. It's
yeah,
very satisfying. When I meet people who really like Voyager, and when I meet people who really like the characters, it is very satisfying.
good. I mean, I think that has to be, it's unique, right, to
Yeah,
Hollywood in general, but I think as writers, and I think being in the Star Trek franchise, that's a different little beast of its own. But
it
um,
is.
yeah, it's unique, and I think it's exciting when we can celebrate that 30 years later, and you still see these same characters blossoming in other
Yeah.
series. So
Yes.
thank you for your efforts, because as a Voyager
Thanks.
fan, I love it. I love that we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, a question then, as the writer, Why was Harry never promoted? No, I'm joking.
That's a great. No, I want to know. The world wants to know.
That was above my pay grade. That was an executive producer decision.
I think Garrett Wayne wants to know, doesn't he?
Yeah, he wants to know too.
Well, to be fair, he's now a lieutenant junior grade in lower decks. So
lower decks. That's right.
So that's a win.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. That was great, Mike. Well done.
I had to get it in there. I'll get.
You did. I'm
if I didn't.
Right.
If you could change something about Voyager, what would it be and why?
Well, I wish that they had kind of stuck with the premise of being so far from home that we can't necessarily get repairs very easily. We can't get new supplies very easily. You know, the episodes Year of Hell were kind of what I had pictured for the whole series, based on the pilot. You know, that we were going to be just like hanging on by the skin of our teeth pretty much all the time. But I guess Paramount did not want to see that show. They wanted to see, you know, the sleek, you know, starship, and that did not change from week to week.
Yeah.
And that I think was kind of a missed opportunity.
Well, I know from talking to Brannon last week, Year of Hell was supposed to be an entire season.
Yes. Yes, it was.
Oh, yeah.
And that just set my brain running. Can you imagine the sheer amount of things that could have been done for a whole season of a ship?
Yeah, exactly.
To bits.
Exactly.
So I think somewhere, someone out there, some fan films need to make an entire season based on that, just so we can get
I think so.
So obviously there are a lot of episodes that you've either written for, you've either been story editor on, teleplay, etc. Which one is your favorite?
I think one of my favorites is Blood Fever.
Yeah.
That was so much fun to write. Again, you know, B'Elanna is such a great character, and to have her going through something like that. And it was also, I think, a good Paris episode, you know, to see him kind of having to deal with, you know, his feelings for B'Elanna.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a really emotional episode. I really enjoyed writing it.
Well, it impacted, it was a large number of cast and characters that were kind of impacted by what B'Elanna was experiencing. So you got to involve a larger kind of contingency in that main storyline, which was cool.
And the aliens were so much fun. You know, just the moment where they like step out from the walls. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. It's a great episode. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It is a great episode. But I was going through the credits earlier, and you are both executive story writer and teleplay for one of my favorite season 4 episodes, which is Message in a Bottle.
Oh, thank you. That again was so much fun. You know, again, writing for the Doctor and for another version of a Doctor was so much fun. Yeah. I mean, that episode was a comedy.
Yeah. I love that episode a lot.
Yeah.
I also think you can kind of see in EMH Mark II a lot of how the Doctor was back in season 1. Yes. And then kind of having the two play off each other and learn from each other. I just think it just brings a sort of level to that story that I just love.
Well, thank you.
And of course, it's got Romulans in it, so who doesn't love a good Romulan story? Do you have like one sort of really prominent memory from your time working on Voyager? So it could be in the writer's room, on the set, etc.
Yes, I do, actually. I was on the set one day when we were doing a bridge scene, and so basically all the regular cast was there. And Garrett had brought a friend to the set, this woman, Heather. And so he basically, you know, we were all like on a break for something. And so he, you know, we were all standing out in the hall. And so he brought Heather down and he introduced, you know, this is Kate Mulgrew, this is Tim Russ, this is and this is Lisa Klink, the writer. And she goes, "You're Lisa Klink?" You didn't have that reaction to anybody else, but then it was like, "You're the writer? Wow!" So naturally, she became one of my best friends.
Right?
Oh, that's awesome.
That's immediate best friend, right?
Yes,
right there on the spot.
She is, from that moment, and she is still one of my best friends to this day.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That had to be rare back in that day, I would think. And that because we just, like I said, it's not like we could pause the show easily and catch all the
and see the
names.
writers. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, because they scroll
So
through so quick.
exactly.
so quick. I mean, the
Um,
VCRs were good, Mike, but they weren't that good.
no,
True.
and trying to read it with it bouncing up and down, as you know. I am old
Right?
enough to remember VCR.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank goodness.
I was like
Makes me feel
15
so
when
much
DVD
better.
came out.
There he is. Whatever. Can't even.
Child.
Child. Absolute child.
I know, but never mind.
That's right.
So obviously, you were only on 4 episodes of Voyager. There were obviously 3
Seasons.
more. That's what I meant.
3.
Sorry, seasons. Sorry. How do you feel? How did you feel? Sorry, when Voyager ended, were there hopes for maybe an 8th season?
No, it was planned for 7 seasons from the beginning.
Right.
Next Generation run 7 seasons, and I think DS9, was also planned for 7 seasons, and that
Yeah.
it felt good that we had kind of an end date in mind, especially
Okay.
for Voyager, because we knew that, obviously the end of Voyager was getting back to Earth.
Yeah.
And so that's something that you couldn't do and then maybe have another season after that. It was really helpful to know when it was going to end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you had the opportunity to come back to the Star Trek franchise, would you?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
No hesitation.
Kurtzman, you heard it.
No
here first.
hesitation.
You heard it, yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody call Kurtzman. We got news to share.
So
I do want. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
no,
Sorry.
go on. You go.
Well, I just want to say, so this year at Clonestar, not only just celebrating the 30th anniversary of Voyager, but we're also kind of celebrating the women of Trek.
Mhm.
And so with Voyager being such, it's kind of praised for showcasing like strong and, multifaceted female characters.
Mhm.
Do you feel like moving forward from Voyager, how important and influential was Voyager in the portrayal of women moving forward, after that in sci-fi?
I think it was very important because it's so public, because everybody knows Star Trek and everybody pays attention to Star Trek. And so I think that us having a female captain, and I think just as importantly, having the crew not care that she's female, having it be just not a factor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was really important, that it was just another captain.
Yes.
And I think that has been very influential.
Yeah. And I really think, I know for me, like, because I was in my late 20s, whatever, when Voyager started, and like being able to see that, like a female in charge, and nobody's thinking twice about it, like not facing any of the things that we all knew were going on in the real world. But it was so powerful to, as a young adult-ish person at the time, and I think it really continues to resonate for young people and women when they watch the series. I do too. I do. So with that, and you've talked a little bit earlier about how Jerry Taylor was, kind of owned Janeway in that creation and that. But do you think, like that approach to writing Janeway, like giving her unique position as a female captain, did that like kind of challenge traditional like male leadership role models, or was that kind of embraced in creating that character?
I think we really tried to embrace her as an individual. Her gender was part of what made her an individual, but it wasn't her defining role. Her defining role was being a leader. And that was really what we focused on. And her leadership style, was influenced by the fact that she had been a scientist, before she became, a command track. And the fact that, she had left a fiance back home, and, the fact that she had to, incorporate the Maquis into the crew. And I mean, there was a lot of things that made her an individual, and being female was just part of it.
Right. I think that's very true. And I think it comes across from the character and obviously the way Kate Mulgrew, embraced and portraying, Janeway had a lot to do with that too. Um, I wonder then, do you see that evolvement of Janeway throughout the series? And, particularly in that era, like by the time season 4 hits, 3 and 4, you kind of see her change a little bit at times in her attitude to her crew. I feel like it becomes, she embraces the idea of family, but yet still tries to maintain that captain role.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
there are moments, like I remember this moment when, what the, where B'Elanna does the Barge of the Dead.
Oh yeah.
Well, I can't, because I remember I'm terrible with the episode names, so
Yeah.
forgive
Yeah,
me.
me too.
Okay, good. That makes me feel better. But like I remember, like at the end of that, B'Elanna comes out of that, and her immediate thing is to hug Janeway,
Yeah,
and Janeway has that moment of shock, like, but then realizes, she's kind of playing that mother role
she
at that
is.
moment. And so, did you think that shift in Janeway, as the series grew, as the character grew, was integral to the storyline, or did that just naturally evolve because of the stories you were telling?
I think it naturally evolved. That any crew, who were stuck together for, years at a time and who only had each other to depend on, they never got to go home and visit family, they didn't have anything familiar, except each other. And so I think that everybody treating each other more like family became more and more prominent as the series went on. And Janeway was certainly part of that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes absolute sense. I know we talked a little bit then about B'Elanna and her character's duality and struggles, and I want to ask about two more characters if you don't mind. One I'd like to ask about is Seska.
I
And
didn't have a lot to do with Seska, actually. I never
okay,
wrote any of those episodes.
all right, I was just simply curious because she was
Mhm.
a pretty complex character as things
She
went
was.
on. So, and really influenced some big parts of Voyager's journey.
Absolutely.
So she was just, I think she is unique when it comes to villains.
Yes.
it,
Yes, absolutely.
for Star Trek. So that's fair enough. So and then I can't leave without asking you about Seven of
Yeah.
Nine, and bringing that character in as Borg,
Hmm.
because the big bad Borg with
Hmm.
TNG, I mean, they left a pretty deep impression on all the fans and
Yes, they
viewers.
did.
So, what drove that decision to bring a character as Borg transitioning to human, or that duality of balancing both identities?
Well, I think that Paramount wanted to bring in kind of a shot on the arm. I think they felt that
Hmm.
Voyager didn't get the ratings that they were hoping that it would get.
Right,
And so they wanted to introduce basically a new character and quite honestly, a really sexy character.
right.
That's what they wanted. They wanted a
Hmm.
beautiful woman who they could put her in a skin tight catsuit,
Yep.
and making her Borg, I think was a really good idea
Yeah.
because that made the character fascinating. I mean, again,
Hmm.
especially because she did not want to be human. And
Right.
so having that different energy, on the ship, I thought was really interesting. And she
Yeah.
wasn't Starfleet. And so
Yeah.
she didn't follow Starfleet rules. She was rude to people. She did things wrong. She
Right.
acted out. And that actually, I think, lent itself to a lot of really good stories. And her
Yeah.
relationship with Janeway was fantastic. I loved
Yes.
writing her and Janeway.
Yeah.
I think one of the
Did
things I
you?
really liked about the seven and nine as a character is the fact that you've almost got this, you know, rebellious teenager
Yep.
Hmm.
and mum, and then you know everything. Well, the vast majority of what Seven learns is actually from the Doctor
Hmm.
Yes.
about being human. So it's almost like that mum, in this case, which is Janeway, takes that back seat, which I
In a
think,
way, although we had
yeah,
enough sort of conflict between Janeway and Seven that I think Seven learned a lot of what was expected of her.
yeah.
Hmm.
That what it was like to be not only human but a crew member and part of a team on this ship.
Hmm. Did you find like having that, her being interesting because of the Borg conflict within, and all of that, but it definitely made storytelling interesting, I would think, because you always had this kind of rebellious or
Hmm.
on the edge of norm Starfleet, and then you had the Maquis crew, right, who
Hmm.
had been also trying to evolve and adapt to Starfleet,
Yeah.
the thing they had always been fighting. So I think it was interesting. I think I liked too the relationship of Seven and B'Elanna,
Yeah.
because there are times they very much so related to each other,
Yes.
but then could
Yes.
easily on a dime like flip on each other and
Yeah.
go head to head. So was that a
Absolutely.
fun duality with those two characters
Oh,
to
definitely.
write? Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I mean, again, Gene Roddenberry's original vision was that, in the future, humans have evolved to the point at which they all get along,
Right.
which is, a really wonderful thing to aspire to, but dramatically, it's really boring. And so, who wants to watch a show about everybody who gets along with each other?
Right.
And
That's
Yeah,
fair.
so,
that's true.
to have characters, like B'Elanna, who had, a temper on her, and like the Doctor, who had
Yeah.
the superiority complex and was rude to people and did not have a
Right.
bedside manner. And then, like you said, the Maquis, who did not want to fit into Starfleet. And then finally, Seven, who was kind of the most extreme of she didn't even want to be human, much less part of this crew and on this ship.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have those characters bringing in conflict, I think really made the show more interesting.
Yeah. Do you have I'm a big fan, obviously, of Voyager and of the characters on that show, but I've always said that I felt Jerry Ryan acted beyond the cat suit. Like she
She did.
didn't need the cat suit to portray that character. But I also think there's a lot of great writing that was behind that too. So that's a testament to you and the folks that sat around that table creating a show that has lasted us, 30 years and beyond. And I think I hope that you feel proud of that effort, because it definitely
Absolutely.
still resonates with folks. Um, so looking back, like I know we've talked a little bit about the legacy of Voyager and being a part of that, but do you feel and the characters, but do you feel like specifically the female characters have maybe outlasted what normally happens in a sci-fi or maybe even television in general?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think
Okay.
Janeway has survived, again with Prodigy and, she being essentially the face of Voyager.
Yeah.
She has evolved. And Seven, again, being such an interesting, conflicted character. And like you said, Jerry Ryan portraying her, I think, very well,
Hmm.
has had a lot to do with Seven being, coming back on Picard and being somebody that we turn to again and again.
Right. Do you think that there's been room to bring like to see like the other female characters? Like, are we just too busy focused on new rather than acknowledging, maybe what fans have seen in the past and wanting to see more of that?
Well, I don't really know, quite
Yeah.
honestly. I mean, I think that when the characters have been brought back, for current shows, I think it really is a case by case basis. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody's kind of looking at Voyager in general saying, okay, which character do we want next?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that like Prodigy thought about, okay, who would be a good mentor to these kids? And they thought, well, Janeway obviously has a lot of mentorship experience, not only with Seven, but with her fairly young and inexperienced crew.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that it really, really is a case by case basis.
Yeah. What about animation in this series? Um, I think it's kind of come into its own in this quote unquote new era of
Yeah.
Trek between Lower Decks and Prodigy,
Hmm.
especially. Um, do you think animation is a great way to see like that involvement of past characters?
It is. It is because I mean it obviously, solves the problem of aging.
Yeah.
And that the
Yep.
characters can be the same
It's
age that
so
they were,
yeah, yeah,
and but no, I think that animation is a really good way to sort of revive past characters and to make it all again feel like one coherent universe.
Yeah. That connectivity matters, I think,
It
especially
does.
in a franchise like Trek. I mean, I think it happens in other sci-fi, series too. I mean, Star Wars has really come into its own too with connecting characters with these, series and yet still bringing us new. So
Yeah,
I think we see it more and more, and I think it resonates with fans, but I think it also resonates with new people to the series,
I
to the
think
show.
so. I think so. I think
So,
that anybody who was, maybe just Lower Decks was their first experience.
oh,
I think they
right.
might be curious to go back and
Yeah.
see some of the live action series.
Yep.
I've been curious to go back because you catch some of these little, Easter eggs that they put in
Hmm.
that show, and you're like,
Yeah,
Ah,
oh, I need to rewatch that.
I
That
yeah,
was,
completely forgot about that. Yeah.
I did,
yeah.
yeah. So that's
Yeah.
been fun.
Hmm.
All right, I'm just going to ask about one more character, but it's not a female character.
Ooh.
Neelix.
Hmm.
What, my cat?
tends- he does have a cat named Neelix.
There
I
you
He
do
go.
is
have a cat
adorable.
called
So,
Neelix.
so he tends to be a bit of a controversial character in the fandom.
Yes, yes, he does.
Was he was he that way when he was being written for?
No, he really
Okay.
wasn't. I mean, again, he was one of the alien characters that had a really distinctive point of view and a
Yeah.
really distinctive personality. And he was so good-natured and so friendly and
Yeah.
just so positive.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes to the point of being annoying, but especially to like Tuvok.
Yeah.
But he was just a source of positivity, that he wasn't controversial at all to us.
Right. I think what I found, just in maybe the few million rewatches I've done of the series, but that he really evolves and becomes that mentor of the
Mhm.
ship. They didn't have a ship's counselor. I know the
Right.
Doctor tried to play that role many times. Janeway obviously
Mhm.
had that role at times, but I think he was the, chief morale officer, or he
Yes.
always had these fun titles, but he really, independently of that all, was always that kind of ship counselor.
He was.
And I think people should try and see the character more that way
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
watching this series, because he's an integral part of that crew when he
Oh,
eventually
absolutely.
does leave, and they all felt that, and I think that
Oh,
was
yeah.
a beautiful thing for that character.
Yeah, and again, Ethan Phillips was so good with
Yeah.
getting sort of the nuances,
Yep.
that he wasn't
Right.
always just out there and extreme, that he had a lot more,
Yeah.
subtleties to him
Yeah.
and really
Right.
distinct relationships with each of the other characters on the show.
Yeah.
I still think my favorite line is "Good to see you, Mr. Vulcan." It's
Yes.
still one of my favorite Neelix lines.
All right,
that
so-
relationship was so much fun.
Oh my gosh. And they both have played it so well.
So well.
Yeah, they did.
That's just, there are characters I think that get written and portrayed, and you just, when the series is said and done, you look back and you're like, no one else could have done that. Like,
No,
no one else could have portrayed that and delivered that character to us in that way.
And worn
Yeah.
those whiskers as well.
yes.
Right. Well, so if we're talking about Neelix and Tuvok, we have to talk about
Tuvix,
Tuvix.
Yep. Yep.
which you were a staff writer on.
Yes. Yeah, no, I was in the room when we were developing Tuvix. And it's funny because it came in, I think, as a pitch,
Oh,
that two
okay.
characters got combined in the transporter. And so we thought about, what would be the two most extremely different characters that we could possibly have.
Don't
Seriously.
get much different than Tuvok and Neelix.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Uh,
at first, honestly, I mean, the premise sounds a little campy, a little
Right.
sitcom-y. and we definitely made fun of it and had fun with it. I think a couple of the guys even came up with a theme song. And
oh, we need that. We need
Yeah,
to know
we need to
that.
find that somewhere.
yeah, I'm sure it exists in the internet somewhere. But when we actually started developing the episode, when we got to the big moral question of do we separate them, we realized that we had set up a really good moral dilemma with no
Yeah.
good answer, which
Yeah.
is wonderful. That's high drama there. That's, a really difficult decision for Janeway. And I know it was a controversial one. A lot of people think that she made the wrong call.
Yeah.
Or that it damaged the character to have her do that. But I think she made the right call personally. But I think that was one of the best moral dilemmas that we ever came up with.
Was it
It
always
really was.
the case that they were going to be separated?
Well, if you think about it, I mean, we weren't going to fire the two actors and hire Tom Wright on full time. We were going to get our regular cast back, so it was never considered that we were going to keep him integrated.
I think, especially for those two characters, after that episode, I feel that the two of them have a much closer relationship than they do pre Tuvix episode.
Yes, I would agree with that.
I definitely think it brought them closer together. But yeah, it's such a great episode.
It is. Well, and Lower Decks did that whole.
Turned it up to 11.
Yes, I mean they did that whole story. They did a whole episode called Tuvix, TWOVIX, where the Cerritos crew gets all combined through transporter issues, all while they're trying to take the Voyager back to the Space Museum.
Yep.
It's a brilliant episode. It paid great tribute to that whole Tuvix episode, and I think it's fun. I think it was great because, like you said, it still can be quite a controversy deciding whether or not Janeway did the right thing or not. I mean, people have strong opinions about it, so
they really do.
They do.
Yeah, a couple of years ago on Trek Talks, the telethon, that benefits the Hollywood Food Coalition. I was part of a panel on Tuvix, and we had Tim Russ and Ethan Phillips and Tom Wright. And our hosts were Robert Duncan McNeil and Garrett Wong. And we debated Tuvix, and we all had different opinions about whether she did the right thing or not.
Yeah, that's one hell of a dilemma, isn't it? When you really sit down and think about it, you go, actually, that is one hell of a dilemma.
It is.
It is. But it was well played. I think Kate Mulgrew did great in expressing Janeway's dilemma of making that decision as a captain. I mean, I always look at it as she, her goal was to get her crew back home. Yes. And her crew were not
Tuvok and Neelix.
Yeah, they were Tuvok and Neelix. And I think...
Yeah, exactly.
I always felt that played into her decision-making there. Yeah. But...
And that whole episode wouldn't have worked without Tom Wright's performance as Tuvix.
Oh my gosh, no!
I mean, he absolutely walked the line between those two characters, and I thought he was brilliant.
Yeah. He really was, and I think you felt that, like you saw both characters in him, not just with the makeup and the the aliening of his space, but it was just so well done. We should talk about him more, I think, sometimes. That's a whole episode.
Yeah.
So, obviously, Voyager and DS9 are not the only Star Trek projects that you've worked on. Were you part of the Star Trek Voyager Retribution video game?
I was not.
You were not?
I mean, they called me in to consult, and I went in for one meeting, and that was about it.
Oh, okay. Because obviously it never really kind of materialized, did it?
No.
Which I think was a bit of a shame, because I think the premise for it was actually quite interesting. I think it would have been nice to have, because there were a couple of Voyager games, but I think it would have been nice to have a more recent. Because what was that? Was it late 90s, if I remember correctly?
I think so.
Yes. And then there's obviously another one, which is the Star Trek Experience Borg Invasion 4D, which you wrote.
Yes, that was so much fun.
How did that come about?
Well, the producers approached me about writing it, because it was basically a short film, you
Right.
know, that combined with, the physical experience of being in the seats and walking through the halls and all that sort of thing. And I had a blast writing that. It started off with a meeting, obviously, with the game producers and me and the director. And, we talked about what can we do and what can we do that will take advantage of the technology that we were
Yep.
working with. Like the chairs that had, they could shake, they could vibrate, they could make it feel like you're, bugs crawling over you or, bored tentacles, reaching into
Yeah.
your back. And we thought, how badly can we scare people, without actually giving somebody a heart attack? And that's kind of the line that we were looking to walk was to terrify everybody and just give them a really good shock when they felt those Borg tubules, touching
Yeah.
them. So, and, writing for the Borg Queen was, of course, wonderful. Because she was, it's such a dramatic character, and she speaks in such like grandiose terms, resistance is futile, and it's almost Shakespearean. It's very dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah. What was different about writing for that than, those characters like the Borg Queen on the series versus this kind of focused experience?
Well, they were the characters, I mean, the Doctor and the Borg Queen were directly addressing the audience, which made it a very different experience. They weren't talking to other people on screen. They were really looking at the audience, who obviously wasn't going to talk back.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
it wasn't a dialogue as much as it was a monologue. And again, you had to sort of think about what was the audience doing at that moment? Were they standing in the hallways, listening to the Doctor give a briefing? Were they sitting in the chairs yet? Were they shaking in the chairs? And so trying to incorporate all of that was fun.
Yeah, so it's just kind of a different perspective on the storytelling, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I mean,
That's
I
cool.
love trying different formats. I mean, I've written, short stories and novels and graphic novels and TV and screenplays and everything. And
Do you have a
I really
favorite?
like it. Television is probably my favorite, I gotta
Really?
say. Yeah. Yeah,
Do you
so
think
far.
that's because that's where you started, or just you still gravitate back to that?
I think it's partly because it's where I'm started,
Yeah.
and partly because I tend to be a kind of a sparse writer, in that
Okay.
novels are difficult for me, in that because you have to include so much detail.
Mhm.
What it looks like, what it smells like, what the characters are thinking, and all of that. And I'm, again, starting in television, you don't include any of that.
Right.
You just like, who's there, what are they doing, what do they say? And so adjusting novels was really tricky.
Yeah. That's interesting. You don't think about that when it comes to script writing because the sets are a part of the story. They help
Yeah.
tell that too, but you don't have to include that in. You can include the interaction of something on the set, but you don't have
Yeah.
to describe it or give it a role because it exists. That's interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, a screenplay or a teleplay is a blueprint.
Oh,
That
nice.
everybody else, comes in, the director comes in, the set designers, the costume designers, everybody else comes in and brings it to life.
Yeah.
Whereas a novel is a finished product.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Nobody else is going to contribute to it but you.
Yeah. That's a great way to look at that blueprint perspective. I think that tells a lot about the process of what it
Yeah.
is to be a screenwriter.
Mhm.
That's great.
So obviously, Star Trek Voyager was 30 years ago. What
Yes.
have you been doing since?
Well, as I mentioned, I've been working in a bunch of different formats. I did a bunch of different TV shows, mostly sci-fi.
Yep.
I did, Hercules, Roswell, Pandora. I also did a show called Martial Law, which was just a cop show,
Yeah.
but with Sammo Hung. So it was a cop show with Hong Kong martial arts in it. That was fun.
Nice.
And I've written a couple of novels and co-written a couple more. Done bunch of short stories for Star Trek Explorer magazine. And that was fun to kind of relive those characters.
Yeah.
So long after Voyager. I've written a couple of graphic novels, a couple episodes of Batman for DC Comics, and
Love a good Batman comic.
yeah, me
Right?
too. Me too.
Although I'm sorry, but Superman is still better than Batman. So
Yeah,
I love
Don't
Batman.
start.
But,
Don't start that.
don't start that.
No,
Don't
because
start
Show is
that.
very much in the opposite camp. He's very much
Yeah.
Batman, whereas I'm very much Superman.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because this actually came to me when I was on Voyager, and then I got a fan letter from one of the editors at DC Comics who said that he loved Voyager, he really liked my episodes, and they were always looking for new writers, especially female writers. And had I ever thought about writing a comic book? And I hadn't, but I was like, yeah. That seems like fun. And he said,
That's
which DC
awesome.
character would you like to write? And I said, Batman.
Nice.
So I got to write 2 Batmans. It was fantastic.
That is
Oh, that's cool.
fantastic. That's so cool. Would you go back to that genre?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because that editor and I are actually still writing partners. We just finished
cool.
writing a screenplay together, and we are currently working on a graphic novel together.
Awesome.
Oh, that's awesome.
I
Yeah.
love that.
That's awesome.
You were talking about the series you wrote that was the cop show, but with the. So what's it like writing action into a script or whatever you're doing, like in that regard, like especially if it's focused like a specific skill, like in that regard. How is that difficult? Is it challenging?
Well, we were very lucky with martial law in that, Sammo Hung was an artist and also a
Right.
stunt coordinator. And he had his entire crew of stunt coordinators and stuntmen
Oh.
with him. And
Right.
so we didn't have to call out, so-and-so punches so-and-so, so-and-so
Oh,
kicks
okay.
so-and-so in the face.
He did it.
He did it. We would just kind of set up the parameters of,
Okay.
they're on this location, they are facing this many bad guys, and at one point it looks like they're winning, but then it turns that the other people are winning. And so we would just kind of call out the general parameters of the fight, and then they would choreograph something fantastic, and we would take credit for it.
Nice.
really-
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Really, you're kind of putting an outline of the story, and then
Yes.
it's down to them to actually kind of flesh it out and put it together. And right, got you. That makes me
Yes, in that
Yeah.
case. I mean, on other shows, you would probably have to be a lot more specific with your choreography.
Yeah.
Like on Voyager, I had a fight one time between B'Elanna and Vorik, a Vulcan. And
Yep.
so we called out a little bit of, the specifics for that. But then our stunt coordinator came in and filled it out and added a lot more specifics.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Jody, do you have any more questions?
I really would just like to also ask about, we talked about looking back, what you would have changed if you would have changed anything. But if you were going to, look
I've just noticed
forward.
Cat has appeared.
I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's been sitting on the back of my chair. Yeah. This is
Mine-
Loki. He loves
Oh,
you.
nice.
Sit on the top.
That's awesome. It's like you beamed in. It was great.
Yes.
Yeah, that was good.
So all of a sudden, this cat just appears.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, oh,
As
they do that.
As they
I
do.
have, I have to keep mine locked out because I have 2. I have Neelix, obviously, and then his sister is called Cinder, as in the dragon from Spyro,
Gotcha.
and she likes Lego. She likes chewing on Lego, and I have lots of Lego, which is now all been renegated to this rather small office. There's some behind me. There's lots more over there. I have a couple of Star Wars droids that had antennas. They don't have antennas anymore.
Not anymore.
No. Luckily, I can buy replacement Lego bricks now.
Yes.
But they do. They just appear, and it's just like I now have to keep the door locked.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, I love
Cats
them
have their
dearly.
own. Yes, right.
They do.
All right.
I can't
So
remember what we were
I was
saying. No, sorry. Before we got
I got
sidetracked
it.
by
I got
cats.
it. That's okay. They're a good distraction.
Yes.
So I basically was saying we've talked about looking back, what you enjoyed about writing, but looking at Star Trek as it moves forward, and continues to evolve, what would you like to see from the franchise as it moves forward?
That's a good question. I think they're actually doing pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm enjoying the current shows. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying Strange New Worlds, especially. I mean,
Yeah.
even though it's kind of a throwback show,
Yeah.
to the early days of, Kirk and Spock, etc. But I don't know. I guess I would like to continue looking forward. I mean, as much as
Yeah.
I enjoy Strange New Worlds, I mean, Discovery is satisfying in that it's, they're looking now in the very far future,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting and again, a really unexplored area,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah. Right.
Um, but no, I think they're actually doing pretty well.
Yeah. So you're still a fan.
I am.
That's
I
good.
am.
That's exciting. Um, I would like to also ask, so, as a writer and as someone who's written in, several different genres of the field, what advice would you give to, young writers or people starting off in their career as a writer, hopefully?
I would say just keep writing.
Mm-hmm.
I've run into some writers who've written like one screenplay or one teleplay, and all of their energy is focused on selling that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what I always advise them is write more, do another screenplay, do another teleplay, write a pilot, just keep writing. Because writing is one of those things, unlike acting or directing, that you can do by yourself,
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and you can always be working on something new. And that's my recommendation is always be working on something new.
Do you think like fan fiction, I think has been something that has grown and evolved and the social media and online has really helped I think propel that. But do you think that is good for, the characters that get written out there at times? Or like fans take this, vested interest to tell more of their story in from their perspective?
I mean, I think that it's great for the audience,
Mm-hmm.
that they that they get to relive these characters and kind of live inside their skin for a while. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would really encourage people to do that.
Yeah. Good.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your story and coming on this week to our lovely podcast. We have one final question. We ask it of all of our guests. It's really easy, but won't have to take any thinking whatsoever. But, Lisa Klink, what does Star Trek mean to you?
Hope.
Hope.
Really, I mean, the future that we're looking at is better than the present.
Yep.
The whole idea that we're going to continue to evolve and continue to improve, I think is very hopeful. And I think that that's why Star Trek has lasted as long as it has, because people really need that vision.
Agreed.
Wholeheartedly
Absolutely.
agree. Yeah.
What's next for you?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm working with my writing partner on a graphic novel at the moment. We also recently completed a screenplay that we're shopping around. And I'm currently doing my own podcast with my co-host, Peter Holmstrom. It's called the Trexperts Briefing Room.
Oh,
And
okay.
we watch an episode of Star Trek with, somebody who was associated with it. Sometimes the writer, one of the actors, or sometimes we'll bring in an expert, like we had a bioethicist, come in and talk about Tuvix, actually. And,
Wow.
we've had the science advisors come on the show, and that's just a whole lot of fun. It
That's
really gives
cool.
me a good excuse to reach out to a lot of people that I haven't talked to for maybe 30 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love it.
Awesome. We will put a link to that podcast in the description for you.
Yes, we will.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Well, look, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. For everyone else watching and listening at home, remember you can catch up with more Clonestar Podcast at our website, clonestarpod.com, and at our Patreon, patreon.com/Clonestar. But until next time, live long and prosper.